Chapter 10 of Isaac Asimov's The Naked Sun. Baley could not prevent himself from crying out, "What?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked over his shoulder as the moments of silence passed and said finally, "Not Earth's present culture, no." Baley said, "Oh. But in the past, yes. Earth's ancient history. As an Earthman, you know it, of course." "I've viewed books," said Baley cautiously. "Ah, then you understand." Baley, who did not, said, "Let me explain exactly what I want, Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲. I want you to tell me what you can about Solaria, why it is so different from the other outer worlds, why there are so many robots, why you behave as you do. I'm sorry if I seem to be changing the subject." Baley most certainly wanted to change the subject. Any discussion of a likeness or unlikeness between Solaria's culture and Earth would prove too absorbing by half. He might spend the day there and come away none the wiser as far as useful information was concerned. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 smiled. "If you want to compare Solaria and the other outer worlds, and not Solaria and Earth—" "I know Earth, sir." "As you wish." The Solarian coughed slightly. "Do you mind if I turn my chair completely away from you? It would be more comfortable." "As you wish, Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲," said Baley stiffly. "Good." A robot turned the chair at 𝗧𝗵𝗲's low-voiced order, and as the sociologist sat there, hidden from Baley's eyes by a substantial chair back, his voice took on added life, and even deepened and strengthened in tone. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said, "Solaria was first settled about 300 years ago. The original settlers were Nexonians. You are acquainted with Nexon?" "I'm afraid not." "It is close to Solaria, only about 2 parsecs away. In fact, Solaria and Nexon represent the closest pair of inhabited worlds in the galaxy. Solaria, even when uninhabited by man, was life-bearing and eminently suited for human occupation. It represented an obvious attraction to the well-to-do of Nexon, who found it difficult to maintain a proper standard of living on their own filled-up planet." Baley interrupted. "Filled up? I thought Spaces practiced population control." "Solaria does, but the outer worlds in general control it rather laxly. Nexon was completing its 2nd million of population at the time I speak of. There was sufficient crowding to make it necessary to regulate the number of robots that one might own by a particular family. So those Nexonians who could establish summer homes on Solaria, which was fertile, temperate, and without dangerous fauna. The settlers on Solaria could still reach Nexon without too much trouble, and while on Solaria they could live as they pleased. They could use as many robots as they could afford, or felt the need for. Estates could be as large as desire, since with an empty planet, room was no problem, and with unlimited robots, exploitation was no problem. Robots grew to be so many that they were outfitted with radio contact, and that was the beginning of our famous industry. We began to develop new varieties, new attachments, new capabilities. Culture dictates invention. A phrase I believe I have invented." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 chuckled. A robot, responding to some stimulus Baley could not see beyond the barrier of the chair, brought 𝗧𝗵𝗲 a drink similar to that Baley had earlier. None was brought to Baley, so he decided to ask for none. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 went on. "The advantages of life on Solaria were obvious to all who watched. Solaria became fashionable. More Nexons established homes, and Solaria became what I like to call a villa planet. And of the settlers, more and more took to remaining on the planet all year round, and carrying on their businesses on Nexon through proxies. Robot factories were established on Solaria. Farms and mines began to be exploited to the point where exports were possible. In short, Mr. Baley, it became obvious that Solaria, in the space of a century or less, would be as crowded as Nexon had been. It seemed ridiculous and wasteful to find such a new world and then lose it through lack of foresight. To spare you a great deal of complicated politics, I need say only that Solaria managed to establish its independence and make it stick, without war. Our usefulness to the other outer worlds as a source of specialty robots gained us friends and helped us, of course. Once independent, our first care was to make sure the population did not grow beyond reasonable limits. We regulated immigration and birth and take care of all needs by increasing and diversifying the robots we use. Baley said, "Why is it the Solarians object to seeing one another?" He felt annoyed at the manner in which 𝗧𝗵𝗲 chose to expound sociology. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 poked round the corner of his chair and retreated almost at once. "It follows inevitably. We have huge estates. An estate, 10,000 square miles in area, is not uncommon. Although the largest ones contain considerable unproductive areas. My own estate is 950 square miles in area, but every bit of it is good land. In any case, it is the size of an estate, more than anything else, that determines a man's position in society. And one property of a large estate is this. You can wander about it in almost aimlessly, with little or no danger of entering a neighbor's territory, and thus encountering your neighbor, you see." Baley shrugged. "I suppose I do." "In short, a Solarian takes pride in not meeting his neighbor. At the same time, his estate is so well run by robots and so self-sufficient that there's no reason for him to have to meet his neighbor. The desire not to do so led to the development of ever more perfect viewing equipment, and as the viewing equipment grew better, there was less and less need to see one's neighbor. It was a reinforcing cycle, a kind of feedback. Do you see?" "Look here, Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲," said Baley. "You don't have to make all this so simple for me. I'm not a sociologist, but I've had the usual elementary courses in college. It's only in Earth's college, of course," Baley added with a reluctant modesty designed to ward off the same comment in more insulting terms from the other. "But I can follow mathematics." "Mathematics?" And 𝗧𝗵𝗲, his voice squeaking with the last syllable. "Well, not the stuff they use in robotics, which I wouldn't follow, but sociological relationships I can handle. For instance, I'm familiar with the 𝗓𝗏 relationship." "The what, sir?" "Maybe you have a different name for it. The differential of inconveniences suffered with privileges granted. Di sub j taken to the What are you talking about?" It was the sharp and peremptory tone of a spacer that Baley heard, and he was silenced in bewilderment. Surely the relationship between inconveniences suffered and privileges granted was part of the very essentials of learning how to handle people without an explosion. A private stall in the community bathroom for one person, given for cause, would keep X persons waiting patiently for the same lightning to strike them, the value of X varying in known ways, with known variations in environment and human temperament, as quantitatively described in the 𝗓𝗏 relationship. But then again, in a world where all was privileges and nothing inconvenience, the 𝗓𝗏 relationship might reduce to triviality. Perhaps he had chosen the wrong example. He tried again. "Look, sir, it's one thing to get the quantitative fill-in on the growth of the prejudices against seeing, but it isn't helpful for my purposes. I want to know the exact analysis of the prejudices so I can counteract it effectively. I want to persuade people to see me, as you are doing now. Mr. Baley, you can't treat human emotions as though they were built about a positronic brain." "I'm not saying you can. Robotics is a deductive science and sociology an inductive one, but mathematics can be made to apply to either case." There was silence for a moment. Then 𝗧𝗵𝗲 spoke in a voice that trembled. "You have admitted you are not a sociologist." "I know, but I was told you were one, the best on the planet." "I am the only one. You might almost say I have invented the science." "Oh." Baley hesitated over the next question. It sounded impertinent even to himself. Have you viewed books on this subject? I've looked at some Araran books. Have you looked at books from Earth? Earth? 𝗂𝗲 laughed uneasily. It wouldn't have occurred to me to read any of Earth's scientific productions. No offense intended. Well, I'm sorry. I had thought I would be able to get scientific data that would make it possible for me to interview others. That's Baley speaking. I'm sorry. I had thought it would be able to get specific data that would make it possible for me to interview others face to face without having to... 𝗂𝗲 made a queer, grating, inarticulate sound, and the large chair in which he had sat scraped backwards, then went over with a crash. A muffled, "My apologies," was caught by Baley. Baley had a momentary glimpse of 𝗂𝗲 running with an ungainly stride. Then he was out of the room and gone. Baley's eyebrows lifted. What the devil had he said this time? Jehoshaphat, what wrong button had he pushed? Tentatively he rose from his seat and stopped halfway as a robot entered. "Master," said the robot, "I have been directed to inform you that the Master will view you in a few moments." "View me, boy." "Yes, Master. In the meanwhile, you may desire further refreshment." Another beaker of the pink liquid was at Baley's elbow, and this time a dish of some confectionery, warm and fragrant, was added. Baley took his seat again, sampled the liquor cautiously, and put it down. The confectionery was hard to the touch and warm, but the crust broke easily in the mouth, and the inner portion was at once considerably warmer and softer. He could not identify the components of the taste and wondered if it might not be a product of the native spices or condiments of Solaria. Then he thought of the restricted, yeast-derived diet of Earth, and wondered if there might be a market for yeast strains designed to imitate the tastes of outer-world products. But his thought broke off sharply as sociologist 𝗂𝗲 appeared out of nowhere and faced him this time. He sat in a smaller chair in a room in which the walls and floor clashed sharply with those surrounding Baley. And he was smiling now, so that fine wrinkles on his face deepened and, paradoxically, gave him a more youthful appearance by accentuating the life in his eyes. He said, A thousand pardons, Mr. Baley. I thought I was enduring personal presence so well, but that was a delusion. I was quite on edge, and your phrase pushed me over it, in a manner of speaking." "What phrase was that, sir?" "You said something about interviewing people faced..." He shook his head, his tongue dabbing quickly at his lips. "I would rather not say it. I think you know what I mean. The phrase conjured up the most striking picture of the two of us breathing one another's breath." The Solarian shuddered. "Don't you find that repulsive?" "I don't know that I've ever thought about it so. It seems a filthy habit, and as you said it, and the picture arose in my mind, I realized that after all we were in the same room, and even though I was not facing you, puffs of air that had been in your lungs must be reaching mine, and entering with my sensitive frame of mind." Baley said, "Molecules all over Solaria's atmosphere have been in thousands of lungs. Jehoshaphat! They've been in the lungs of animals and the gills of fish." "That is true," said 𝗂𝗲 with a rueful rub of his cheek. "And I'd just as soon not think of that either." However, there was a sense of immediacy to the situation, with yourself actually there, and with both of us inhaling and exhaling. It's amazing the relief I feel in viewing. It's still in the same house, Dr. 𝗂𝗲. That's precisely what is so amazing about the relief. You are in the same house, and yet just the use of the trimensionals makes all the difference. At least, I know what seeing a stranger feels like now. I won't do it again. That sounds as though you are experimenting with seeing. In a way, said the spacer. "I suppose I was. It was a minor motivation, and the results were interesting, even if they were disturbing as well. It was a good test, and I may record it." "Record what?" said Baley, puzzled. "My feelings." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 returned puzzled stare for puzzled stare. Baley sighed. "Cross purposes. Always cross purposes. I only asked because somehow I assume you would have instruments of some sort to measure emotional responses. An electroencephalograph, perhaps?" He looked about fruitlessly. "Though I suppose you could have a pocket version of the same that works without direct electrical connection. We don't have anything like that on Earth." "I trust," said the Solarian stiffly, "that I am able to estimate the nature of my own feelings without an instrument. They were pronounced enough." "Yes, of course, but a quantitative analysis," began Baley. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said querulously, "I don't know what you're driving at. Besides, I'm trying to tell you something else. My own theory, in fact, something I have viewed in no books, something I am quite proud of." Baley said, "What exactly is that, sir?" "Why, the manner in which Solaria's culture is based on one existing in Earth's past." Baley sighed. If he didn't allow the other to get it off his chest, there might be very little cooperation thereafter. He said, "And that is—" "Sparta," said 𝗧𝗵𝗲, lifting his head so that for a moment the white hairs glistening in the light and seemed almost like a halo. "I'm sure you've heard of Sparta." Baley felt relieved. He had been mightily interested in Earth's ancient past in his younger days. It was an attractive study for many Earthmen, an Earth supreme because it was an Earth alone, Earthmen the masters because there were no spacers. But Earth's past was a large one. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 might well have reference to some phase to which Baley was not acquainted, and that would have been embarrassing. As that was, he could say cautiously, "Yes, I've viewed films on the subject." "Good. Good. Now, Sparta, in its heyday, consisted of a relatively small number of Spartiates, the only full citizens, plus a somewhat larger number of second-class individuals, the Perioeci, and a really large number of outright slaves, the Helots. The Helots outnumbered the Spartiates a matter of 20 to 1, and the Helots were men with human feelings and human failings. In order to make certain that the Helot rebellion could never be successful, despite their overwhelming numbers, the Spartans became military specialists. Each lived the life of a military machine, and the society achieved its purpose. There was never a successful Helot revolt. Now, we human beings on Solaria are equivalent, in a way, to the Spartiates. We have our Helots, and our Helots aren't men, but machines. They cannot revolt and need not be feared, even though they outnumber us 1,000 times as badly as the Spartiates. Humans' Helots are now unnumbered then. We have had the advantage of Spartiate exclusiveness without any need to sacrifice ourselves to rigid mastery. We can, instead, model ourselves on the artistic and cultivated way of life of the Athenians, who are contemporaries of the Spartiates, who," Baley said, "I've viewed films on the Athenians, too." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 grew warmer as he spoke. "Civilizations have always been pyramidal in structure. As one climbs towards the apex of the social edifice, there is increased leisure and increasing opportunity to pursue happiness. As one climbs, one finds also fewer and fewer people to enjoy this more and more. Invariably, there is a preponderance of the dispossessed. And remember this, no matter how well off the bottom layer of the pyramid might be on an absolute scale, they are always dispossessed in comparison with the apex. For example, even the most poorly off humans of Aurora are better off than Earth's aristocrats, and they are dispossessed with respect to Aurora's aristocrats, and it is with the masters of their own world that they are compared themselves. So, there is always social friction in ordinary human societies. The action of social revolution and the reaction of guarding against such revolution or combating it once it has begun are the causes of a great deal of the human misery in which history is permeated. Now, here on Solaria, for the first time, the apex of the pyramid stands alone. In the space of the dispossessed are the robots. We have the first new society, the first really new one, the first great social invention since the farmers of Sumeria and Egypt invented cities." He sat back now, smiling. Baley nodded. "Have you published this?" "I may. Someday. I haven't yet. This is my third contribution." "Were the other two as broad as this?" "They weren't in sociology. I have been a sculptor in my time. The work you see about you," he indicated to statuary, "is my own. And I have been a composer too. But I am getting older, and 𝗓𝗏𝗲 always argued strongly in favor of the applied arts rather than the fine arts, and I decided to go into sociology." Baley said, "It sounds as though 𝗏𝗲 was a good friend of yours." "We knew one another. At my time in life, one knows all adult Solarians, but there is no reason not to agree that 𝗓𝗏𝗲 and I were well acquainted." "What sort of man was 𝗏𝗲?" Strangely enough, the name of the man brought up the picture of Gladia in Baley's mind, and he was plagued with a sudden sharp recall of her as he had last seen her, furious, her face distorted with anger at him. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked a bit thoughtful. "He was a worthy man, devoted to Solaria and to its way of life." "An idealist, in other words?" "Yes, definitely. You could see that in the fact that he volunteered for his job as a fetal engineer. It was an applied art, you see, and I told you his feelings about that." "Was volunteering unusual?" "Wouldn't you say? But I forget, you're an Earthman. Yes, it is unusual. It's one of those jobs that must be done, yet finds no voluntary takers. Ordinarily, someone must be assigned to it for a period of so many years, and it isn't very pleasant to be the one chosen. 𝗏𝗲 volunteered, and for life. He felt the position was too important to be left to reluctant draftees, and he persuaded me into that opinion too. Yet it certainly would never have volunteered. I couldn't possibly make the personal sacrifice, and it was more of a sacrifice for him, since he was almost a fanatic in personal hygiene. I'm still not certain I understand the nature of his job." 𝗧𝗵𝗲's old cheeks flushed gently. "Hadn't you better discuss that with his assistant?" Baley said, "I would certainly have done so by now, sir, if anyone had seen fit to tell me before this moment that he had an assistant." "I'm sorry about that," said 𝗧𝗵𝗲, "but the existence of the assistant is another measure of his social responsibility. No previous occupant of the post provided for one. 𝗏𝗲, however, felt it necessary to find a suitable youngster to conduct the necessary training himself, so as to leave a professional heir behind when the time came for him to retire or, well, to die." The old Solarian sighed heavily. "Yet I outlived him, and he was so much younger. I used to play chess with him many times." "How did you manage that?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲's eyebrows lifted. "The usual way." "You saw one another?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked horrified. "What an idea! Even if I could stomach it, 𝗏𝗲 would never allow it for an instant. Being fetal engineer doesn't blunt his sensibilities. He was a finicky man." "Then how, with 2 boards as any people would play chess?" The Solarian shrugged in a sudden gesture of tolerance. "Well, you're an Earthman. My moves registered on his board and his on mine. It's a simple matter." Baley said, "Do you know Mrs. 𝗏𝗲?" "We viewed one another. She's a field colorist, you know, and I viewed some of her showings. Fine work in a way, but more interesting as curiosities than as creations. Still, they're amusing and show a perceptive mind." "Is she capable of killing her husband, would you say?" "I haven't given it thought. Women are surprising creatures. But then there's scarcely room for argument, is there? Only Miss 𝗏𝗲 could have been close enough to 𝗓𝗏𝗏 to kill him. 𝗓𝗏𝗏 would never, under any circumstances, have allowed anyone else seeing privileges for any reason. Extremely finicky." Perhaps finicky is the wrong word. It was just that he lacked any trace of abnormality, anything of the perverse. He was a good Solarian. Would you call your granting me seeing privileges perverse? Asked Baley. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said, Yes, I think I would. I should say there was a bit of scatophilia involved. Could 𝗏𝗲 have been killed for political reasons? What? I've heard him called a traditionalist. Oh, we all are. You mean there's no group on Solaria who are not traditionalists? I dare say there are some, said 𝗧𝗵𝗲 slowly, who think it is dangerous to be traditionalist. They are overconscious of our small population, of the way the outer worlds outnumber us. They think we are defenseless against possible aggression from the outer worlds. They're quite foolish to think so, and there aren't many of them. I don't think they're a force. Why do you say they are foolish? Is there anything about Solaria that would affect the balance of power in spite of the great disadvantage of numbers? Some new type of weapon? A weapon, certainly. Not a new one. The people I speak of are more blind than foolish not to realize that such a weapon is in operation continuously and cannot be resisted. Baley's eyes narrowed. Are you serious? Certainly. Do you know the nature of the weapon? All of us do. You do, if you stop to think of it. I see it a trifle easier than most, perhaps since I am a sociologist. To be sure, it isn't used as a weapon ordinarily is used. It doesn't kill or hurt. But it is irresistible even so. All the more irresistible because no one notices it. Baley said with annoyance. And just what is this non-lethal weapon? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said, The positronic brain. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said, The positronic robot. Sorry. Chapter the 11th. A farm is inspected. For a moment, Baley went cold. The positronic robot was the symbol of space's superiority over Earthmen. That was weapon enough. He kept his voice steady. It's an economic weapon. Solaria is important to the other outer worlds as a source of advanced models, and so it will not be harmed by them. That's the obvious point, said 𝗧𝗵𝗲 indifferently. That helped us establish our independence. What I have in mind is something else, something more subtle and more cosmic. 𝗧𝗵𝗲's eyes were fixed on his fingers' ends, and his mind was obviously fixed on abstractions. Baley said, Is this another of your sociological theories? 𝗧𝗵𝗲's poorly suppressed look of pride all but forced a short smile out of the Earthman. The sociologist said, It is indeed mine, original as far as I know, and yet obvious if population data on the outer worlds is carefully studied. To begin with, ever since the positronic robot was invented, it has been used more and more intensively everywhere. Not on Earth, said Baley. Now, plainclothesman, I don't know much of your Earth, but I know enough to know that robots are entering your economy. You people live in large cities and leave most of your planetary surface unoccupied. Who runs your farms and mines, then? Robots, admitted Baley. But if it comes to that, Doctor, Earthmen invented the positronic robot in the first place. They did. Are you sure? You can check. It's true. Interesting. Yet, robots made the least headway there, the sociologist said thoughtfully. Perhaps that is because of Earth's large population. It would take that much longer. Yes. Still, you have robots in your cities. Yes, said Baley. More now than, say, 50 years ago. Baley nodded impatiently. Yes, then it fits. The difference is only one of time. Robots tend to displace human labor. A robot economy moves in only one direction, more robots and fewer humans. I've studied population data very carefully, and I've plotted it and made a few extrapolations." He paused in sudden surprise. "Why, that's rather an application of mathematics to sociology, isn't it?" "It is," said Baley. "There may be something to it at that. I will have to give the matter thought. In any case, these are the conclusions I have come to, and I am convinced there is no doubt as to their correctness. The robot-human ratio in any economy that has accepted robot labor tends continuously to increase, despite any laws that are passed to prevent it. The increase is slowed, but never stopped. At first the human population increases, but the robot population increases much more quickly. Then, after a certain critical point is reached..." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 stopped again, then said, "Now let's see. I wonder if the critical point could be determined exactly, if you could really put a figure to it. There's your mathematics again." Baley stirred restlessly. "What happens after the critical point is reached, Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲?" "Oh, the human population begins actually to decline. The planet approaches a true social stability. Aurora will have to, even your Earth will have to. Earth may take a few more centuries, but it's inevitable." "What do you mean by social stability?" "The situation here, in Solaria, a world in which the humans are the leisure class only. So there is no reason to fear the other outer worlds. We need only wait a century, perhaps, and they shall all be Solaria. I suppose that will be the end of human history, in a way. At least its fulfillment. Finally, all men will have all they can need and want. You know, there is a phrase I once picked up. I don't know where it comes from. Something about the pursuit of happiness." Baley said thoughtfully, "All men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." "You've hit it. Where's that from?" "Some old document," said Baley. "Do you see how that has changed here on Solaria, and eventually in all the galaxy? The pursuit will be over. The rights mankind will be heir to will be life, liberty, and happiness. Just that. Happiness." Baley said dryly, "Maybe so. But a man has been killed on your Solaria, and another may yet die." He felt regret almost the moment he spoke, for the expression on 𝗧𝗵𝗲's face was as though he had been struck with an open palm. The old man's head bowed. He said without looking up, "I have answered your questions as well as I could. Is there anything else you wish?" "I have enough." "Thank you, sir. I'm sorry to have intruded on your grief at your friend's death." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked up slowly. "It will be hard to find another chess partner. He kept our appointments most punctual, and he played an extraordinarily even game. He was a good Solarian." "I understand," said Baley softly. "May I have your permission to use your viewer to make contact with the next person I must see?" "Of course," said 𝗧𝗵𝗲. "My robots are yours. And now I will leave you. Done viewing." A robot was at Baley's side within 30 seconds of 𝗧𝗵𝗲's disappearance, and Baley wondered once again how these creatures were managed. He had seen 𝗧𝗵𝗲's fingers move towards a contact as he had left, and that was all. Perhaps the signal was quite a generalized one, saying only, "Do your duty." Perhaps robots listened to all that went on and were always aware of what humans might desire at any given moment, and if their particular robot was not designed for a particular job in either mind or body, the radio web that united all robots went into action, and the correct robot was spurred into action. For a moment, Baley had the vision of Solaria as a robotic net with holes that were small and continually growing smaller, with every human being caught neatly in place. He thought of 𝗧𝗵𝗲's picture of worlds turning into Solaria, of nets forming and tightening, even on Earth, until his thoughts were disrupted. as a robot who had entered spoke with the quiet and even respect of the machine. "I am ready to help you, Master," Baley said. "Do you know how to reach the place where 𝗧𝗏𝗲 once worked?" "Yes, Master." Baley shrugged. He would never teach himself to avoid asking useless questions. The robots knew. Period. It occurred to him that, to handle robots with true efficiency, one must needs be expert. A sort of roboticist. How well did the average Solarian do, he wondered. Probably only so-so. He said, "Get 𝗏𝗲's place and contact his assistant. If the assistant is not there, locate him wherever he is." "Yes, Master." As the robot turned to go, Baley called after it. "Wait! What time is it at the 𝗏𝗲 workplace?" "About 06:30, Master." "In the morning." "Yes, Master." Again, Baley felt annoyance at a world that made itself victim to the coming and going of the sun. It was what came of living on bare planetary surface. He thought fugitively of Earth, then tore his mind away. While he kept firmly to the matter on hand, he managed, well. Slipping into homesickness would ruin him. He said, "Call the assistant anyway, boy, and tell him it's government business, and have one of your other boys bring something to eat. A sandwich and a glass of milk will do." He chewed thoughtfully at the sandwich, which contained a kind of smoked meat, and with half his mind thought that 𝗧𝗏𝗲 would certainly consider every article of food suspect after what had happened to Gruer, and Daniil might be right, too. He finished the sandwich without ill effect, however, immediate ill effect at any rate, and sipped at the milk. He had not learned from 𝗏𝗏 what he had come to learn, but he had learned something, and he sorted it out in his mind. It seemed he had learned a good deal. Little about the murder, to be sure, but more about a larger matter. The robots returned. "The assistants will accept contact, Master." "Good. Was there any trouble at it?" "The assistant was asleep, Master." "Awake now, though." "Yes, Master." The assistant was facing him suddenly, sitting up in bed and wearing an expression of sullen resentment. Baley reared back as though a force barrier had been raised before him without warning. Once again, a piece of vital information that had been withheld from him. Once again, he had not asked the right questions. No one thought to tell him that 𝗧𝗏𝗲's assistant was a woman. Her hair was a trifle darker than ordinary spacer bronze, and there was a quantity of it, at the moment in disorder. Her face was oval, her nose a trifle bulbous, and her chin large. She scratched slowly at her side just above the waist, and Baley hoped the sheet would remain in position. He remembered Gladia's free attitude towards what was permitted while speaking. Baley felt a sardonic amusement at his own disillusion at that moment. Earthmen assumed, however, that all spacer women were beautiful, and certainly Gladia had reinforced that assumption. This one, though, was plain even by Earth's standards. It therefore surprised Baley that he found her contralto attractive when she said, "See here, do you know what time it is?" "I do," said Baley, "but since I will be seeing you, I felt I should warn you." "Seeing me? Skies above." Her eyes grew wide, and she put her hand to her chin. She wore a ring on one finger, the first item of personal adornment Baley had yet seen on Solaria. "Wait, you're not my new assistant. Who are you?" "No, nothing like that. I'm here to investigate the death of 𝗧𝗏𝗲." "Oh, well, investigate then." "What is your name?" "Clarissa Control." "And how long have you been working with Dr. 𝗏𝗲?" 3 years. "I assume you're now at the place of business." Baley felt uncomfortable at the non-committal phrase. but he did not know what to call a place where a fetal engineer worked. "If you mean, am I at the farm?" said Clarissa discontentedly. "I certainly am. I haven't left it since the old man was done in. And I won't leave it, looks like, till an assistant is assigned me. Can you arrange that, by the way?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. I have no influence with anyone here." "Thought I'd ask." Clarissa pulled off the sheet and climbed out of bed without any self-consciousness. She was wearing a one-piece sleeping suit, and her hand went to the notch of the seam, where it ended at the neck. Bailey said hurriedly, "Just one moment. If you'll agree to see me, that will end my business with you for now, and you may dress in privacy." "In privacy?" She put out her lower lip and stared at Bailey curiously. "You're finicky, aren't you? Like the boss?" "Will you see me? I would like to look over the farm." "I don't get this business about seeing, but if you want to view the farm, I'll tour you. If you'll give me a chance to wash and take care of the few things and wake up a little, I'll enjoy a break in routine." "I don't want to view anything. I want to see." The woman cocked her head to one side, and her keen look had something of professional interest in it. "Are you a pervert or something? When was the last time you underwent a gene analysis?" "Jehoshaphat," muttered Bailey. "Look, I'm Elijah Bailey. I'm from Earth." "From Earth!" she cried vehemently. "Skies above. Whatever are you doing here? Or is this some kind of complicated joke?" "I'm not joking. I was called in to investigate Dalmar's death. I'm a plainclothesman, a detective." "You mean that kind of investigation? But I thought everyone knew his wife did it." "No, ma'am. There's some question about it in my mind. May I have your permission to see the farm and you? As an Earthman, you understand, I'm not accustomed to viewing. It makes me uncomfortable. I have permission from the head of security to see people who might help me. I will show you the document if you wish." "Let's see it." Bailey held the official strip up before her imaged eyes. She shook her head. "Seeing? It's filthy. Still, skies above. What's a little more filth in this filthy job? Look here, though. Don't you come close to me. You stay a good distance away. We can shout or send messages by robot if we have to. You understand?" "I understand." Her sleeping suit split open at the seams just as contact broke off, and the last word he heard from her was a muttered, "Earthman." "That's close enough," said Clarissa. Bailey, who was some 25 feet away from the woman, said, "It's all right this distance, but I'd like to get indoors quickly." It had not been so bad this time, somehow. He had scarcely minded the plane trip, and there was no point in overdoing it. He kept himself from yanking at his collar to allow himself to breathe more freely. Clarissa said sharply, "What's wrong with you? You look kind of beat." Bailey said, "I'm not used to the outdoors." "That's right, Earthman. You've got to be cooped up or something, skies above." Her tongue passed over her lips as though it tasted something unappetizing. "Well, come in, then. But let me move out of the way first." "All right, get in." Her hair was in two thick braids that wound about her head in a complicated geometrical pattern. Bailey wondered how long it took to arrange like that, and then remembered that, in all probability, the unerring mechanical fingers of a robot did the job. Her hair set off her oval face and gave it a kind of symmetry that made it pleasant, if not pretty. She did not wear any facial makeup, nor, for that matter, wear her clothes meant to do more than cover her serviceability. Cover her serviceably. For the most part, they were a subdued dark blue, except for her gloves, which covered her up to mid-arm and were badly clashing lilac in color, Apparently they were not part of her ordinary costume. Baley noted the thickening of one finger in the glove, owed to the presence of the ring underneath. They remained at opposite ends of the room, facing one another. Baley said, "You don't like this, do you, ma'am?" Clarissa shrugged. "Why should I like it? I'm not an animal. But I can stand it. You get pretty hardened when you deal with... She paused, and then her chin went up as though she made up her mind to say what she had to say without mincing. "With children." She pronounced the word with a careful precision. "You sound as though you don't like the job you have." "It's an important job. It must be done. Still, I don't like it." "Did 𝗧𝗵𝗲 like it?" "I suppose he didn't, but he never showed it. He was a good Solarian." "And he was finicky." Clarissa looked surprised. Baley said, "You yourself said so, when you were viewing, and I said you might dress in private. You said I was finicky like the boss." "Oh, well, he was finicky. Even viewing, he never took any liberties, always proper." "Was that unusual?" "It shouldn't be. Ideally, you're supposed to be proper. But no one ever is, not when viewing. There's no personal presence involved, so why take any pains, you know? I don't take pains while viewing, except with the boss. You had to be formal with him." "Do you admire Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲?" "He was a good Solarian," Baley said. "You've called this place a farm, and you've mentioned children. Do you bring up children here?" "From the age of a month. Every fetus on Solaria comes here." "Fetus?" "Yes," she frowned. "We get them a month after conception. Does this embarrass you?" "No," said Baley shortly. "Can you show me around?" "I can, but keep your distance." Baley's long face took on a stony grimness as he looked down the length of the long room from above. There was glass between the room and themselves. On the other side, he was sure, there was perfectly controlled heat, perfectly controlled humidity, perfectly controlled asepsis. Those tanks, row on row, each contained the little creatures floating in a watery fluid of precise composition, infused with a nutrient mixture of ideal proportions. Life and growth went on. Little things, some smaller than half his fist, curled on themselves, with bulging skulls and tiny budding limbs and vanishing tails. Clarissa, from her position 20 feet away, said, "How do you like it, plainclothesman?" Baley said, "How many do you have?" "As of this morning, 152. We receive 15 and 20 each month, and we graduate as many to independence." "So this is the only such institution on the planet?" "That's right. It's enough to keep the population steady, counting on a life expectancy of 300 years, and a population of 20,000. This building is quite new. Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 supervised its construction and made many changes in our procedures. Our fetal death rate now is virtually 0. Robots threaded their way among the tanks. At each tank they stopped and checked controls in a tireless, meticulous way, looking at the tiny embryos within. "Who operates on the mother?" asked Baley. "I mean, to get the little things." "Doctors," answered Clarissa. "Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲?" "Of course not. Medical doctors. You don't think Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 would ever stoop to... Never mind." "Why can't robots be used?" "Robots in surgery. First law makes that very difficult, plainclothesman. A robot might perform an appendectomy to save a human life, if he knew how, but I doubt that he'd be unusable after that without major repairs. Cutting human flesh would be quite a traumatic experience for a positronic brain. Human doctors can manage to get hardened to it, even to the personal presence required. Baley said, I noticed that humans tend the fetuses, though. I noticed that robots tend the fetuses, though. Do you and Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 ever interfere? We have to sometimes, when things go wrong. If a fetus has developed trouble, for instance, robots can't be trusted to judge the situation accurately when human life is involved. Baley nodded. Too much risk of a misjudgment and a life lost, I suppose. Not at all. Too much risk of overvaluing a life and saving one improperly. The woman looked stern. As fetal engineers, Baley, we see to it that healthy children are born. Healthy ones. Even the best gene analysis of parents can't assure that all gene permutations and combinations will be favorable, to say nothing of the possibility of mutations. That's our big concern, the unexpected mutations. We got the rate of those down to less than 1 in 1,000, but that means, on average, once a decade we have trouble. She motioned him along the balcony, and he followed her. She said, I'll show you the infants' nurseries and the youngsters' dormitories. They're much more a problem than the fetuses are. With them, we can rely on robots' labor only to a limited extent. Oh, why is that? You would know, Baley, if you ever tried to teach a robot the importance of discipline. First law makes them almost impervious to that fact. They don't think youngsters don't learn that about as soon as they can talk. I've seen a 3-year-old holding a dozen robots motionless by yelling, You'll hurt me, I'm hurt. It takes an extremely advanced robot to understand that a child might be deliberately lying. Could 𝗧𝗵𝗲 handle the children? Usually. How did he do that? Did he get out among them and shake sense into them? Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲. Touch them? Skies above. Of course not. But he could talk to them, and he could give a robot specific orders. I've seen him viewing a child for 15 minutes and keeping a robot in spanking position all that time, getting it to spank. Spank, spank. A few like that, and the child would risk fooling with the boss no more. And the boss was skillful enough about it that usually the robot didn't need more than a routine readjustment afterward. How about you? Do you go out among the children? I'm afraid I have to sometimes. I'm not like the boss. Maybe someday I'll be able to handle the long-distance stuff. But right now, if I tried, I would just ruin robots. There's an art to handling robots really well, you know, when I think of it, though. Getting out among the children's little animals. She looked back at him suddenly. I suppose you wouldn't mind seeing them. It wouldn't bother me. She shrugged and stared at him with amusement. Earthman. She walked on again. What's all this about, anyway? You'll have to end up with Gladia 𝗧𝗵𝗲's murderers. You'll have to. I'm not quite sure of that, said Baley. How could you be anything else but sure? What else could it possibly be? There are possibilities, ma'am. Who, for instance? Well, you, for instance. And Clarice's reaction to that quite surprised Baley. She laughed. Chapter the 12th. A target is missed. She laughed. The laughter grew and fed on itself till she was gasping for breath, and her plump face had reddened almost to purple. She leaned against the wall and gasped for breath. No, don't come closer, she said. I'm all right. Baley said gravely, Is the possibility that humorous? She tried to answer and laughed again. Then in a whisper said, Oh, you are an Earthman. How could it ever be me? You knew him well, said Baley. You knew his habits. You could have planned it. And you think I would see him, that I would get close enough to bash him over the head with something. You just don't know anything at all about it, Baley. Baley felt himself redden. Why couldn't you get close enough to him, ma'am? You've had practice, mingling with the children. One thing leads to another. You seem to be able to stand my presence. At 20 feet, she said contemptuously. I've just visited a man who nearly collapsed because he had to endure my presence for a while. Clarissa sobered and said, A difference in degree. I suggest that a difference in degree is all that is necessary. The habit of seeing children makes it possible to endure 𝗏𝗲 just long enough. I would like to point out, Mr. Baley, said Clarissa, no longer appearing at least amused, that it doesn't matter respect what I can endure. Dr. 𝗏𝗲 was the finicky one. He was almost as bad as Liebig himself. Almost. Even I could endure seeing him. He would never endure seeing me. Mrs. 𝗏𝗲 is the only one he could possibly have allowed within seeing distance. Baley said, Who's this Liebig you mentioned? Clarissa shrugged. One of those odd genius types, if you know what I mean. He'd done work with a boss on robots. Baley checked that off mentally and returned to the matter at hand. He said, It could be said you had a motive. What motive? His death put you in charge of this establishment, gave you position. You called that a motive? Skies above, who could want this position? Who on Solaria? This is a motive for keeping him alive. It is a motive for hovering over him and protecting him. You have to do better than that, Earthman. Baley scratched his neck uncertainly with one finger. He saw the justice of that. Clarissa said, Do you notice my ring, Mr. Baley? For a moment it seemed she was about to strip the glove from her right hand, but she refrained. I noticed it, said Baley. You don't know its significance, I suppose. I don't. He would never have done with ignorance, he thought bitterly. Do you mind a small lecture, then? If it will help me make sense of this damned world, blurted out Baley, by all means. Skies above, Clarissa smiled. I suppose we seem to you as Earth would seem to us. Imagine, say, here's an empty chamber. Come in here and we'll sit down. No, the room's not big enough. Tell you what, though, you take a seat in here and I'll stand out here. She stepped further down the corridor, giving him space to enter the room, then returned, taking up her stand against the opposite wall as a point from where she could see him. Baley took his seat, with only the slightest quiver of chivalry countering it. He thought rebelliously, Why not? Let the spacer woman stand. Clarissa folded her muscular arms across her chest and said, Gene analysis is the key to our society. We don't analyze for genes directly, of course. Each gene, however, governs one enzyme, and we can analyze for enzymes. Know the enzyme, know the body chemistry. Know the body chemistry, know the human being. You see all that? I understand the theory, said Baley. I don't know how it's applied. That part's done here. Blood samples are taken while the infant is still in the late fetal stage. That gives us our first rough approximation. Ideally, we should catch all mutations at that point and judge whether birth can be risked. In actual fact, we still don't quite know enough to eliminate all possibility of mistake. Someday, maybe. Anyway, we continue testing after births, biopsies as well as body fluids. In any case, long before adulthood, we know exactly what our little boys and girls are made of. Sugar and spice, a nonsense phrase, went unbidden through Baley's mind. We wear coded rings to indicate our gene constitution. said Clarissa. "It's an old custom, a bit of the primitive left behind from the days when Solaria had not yet been weeded eugenically. Nowadays we're all healthy," Baley said. "But you still wear yours? Why?" "Because I'm exceptional," she said with unembarrassed, unblunted pride. Dr. Delmar spent a long time searching for an assistant. He needed someone exceptional. Brains, ingenuity, industry, stability. Most of all, stability. Someone who could learn to mingle with children and not break down. He couldn't, could he? Was that a measure of his instability? Clarissa said. In a way it was. But at least it was a desirable type of instability under most circumstances. You wash your hands, don't you? Baley's eyes dropped to his hands. They were as clean as need be. Yes, he said. All right. I suppose it's a measure of instability to feel such revulsion at dirty hands as to be unable to clean an oily mechanism by hand, even in an emergency. Still, in the ordinary course of living, the revulsion keeps you clean, which is good. I see. Go ahead. There's nothing more. My genic health is the third highest ever recorded on Solaria, so I wear my ring. It's a record I enjoy carrying with me. I congratulate you. You needn't sneer. It may not be my doing. It may be the blind permutation of parental genes, but it's a proud thing to own anyway. And no one would believe me capable of so seriously psychotic and active murder, not with my gene makeup, so don't waste accusations on me. Baley shrugged and said nothing. The woman seemed to confuse gene makeup and evidence, and presumably the rest of Solaria would do the same. Clarissa said, Do you want to see the youngsters now? Thank you, yes. The corridor seemed to go on forever. The building was obviously a tremendous one. Nothing like the huge banks of apartments in the cities of Earth, of course, but for a single building clinging to the outside skin of a planet, it must be a monumentous structure. There were hundreds of cribs with pink babies, squalling or sleeping or feeding. Then there were playrooms for the crawlers. They're not too bad even at this age, said Clarissa grudgingly. Though they take up a tremendous sum of robots. It's practically a robot per baby till walking age. Why is that? They sicken if they don't get individual attention. Baley nodded. Yes, I suppose the requirement for affection is something that can't be done away with. Clarissa frowned and said brusquely, Babies require attention. Baley said, I'm a little surprised that robots can fulfill the need for affection. She whirled toward him, the distance between them not sufficient to hide her displeasure. See here, Baley, if you are trying to shock me by using unpleasant terms, you won't succeed. Skies above, don't be childish. Shock you. I can use the word too. Affection. Do you want a short word? A good four-lettered word? I can say that too. Love. Love. There, if it's out of your system, behave yourself. Baley did not trouble to dispute the matter of obscenity. He said, Can robots really give the necessary attention, then? Obviously, or this farm would not be the success it is. They fool with the children, they nuzzle it and snuggle it. The child doesn't care that it's only a robot. But then, things grow more difficult between 3 and 10. Oh. During that interval, the children insist on playing with one another, quite indiscriminately. I take it you let them. We have to, but we never forget our obligation to teach them the requirements of adulthood. Each has a separate room that can be closed off, even from the first, when they must sleep alone. We insist on that, and then we have an isolation time every day, and that increases with the years. By the time a child reaches 10, he is able to restrict himself to viewing for a week at a time. Of course, the viewing arrangements are elaborate. They can view outdoors under mobile conditions and can keep it up all day. Baley said, I'm surprised you can counter an instinct so thoroughly. You do counter it, I see that. Still, it surprises me. What instinct? Demanded Clarissa. The instinct for gregariousness. There is one. You say yourself that as children they insist on playing with one another. Clarissa shrugged. Do you call that an instinct? But then, what if it is? Skies above. A child has an instinct fear for falling, but adults can be trained to work in high places, even where there are constant danger of falling. Haven't you ever seen gymnastic exhibitions on high wires? There are some worlds where people live in tall buildings, and children have instinctive fear for loud noises too, but are you afraid of them? Not within reason, said Baley. I'm willing to bet that Earth people couldn't sleep if things were really quiet. Skies above, there isn't an instinct around that can't give way to a good, persistent education. Not in human beings, where instincts are weak anyway. In fact, you have to go about it right. Education gets easier with each generation. It's a matter of evolution. Baley said, How is that? Don't you see? Each individual repeats his own evolutionary history as he develops. Those fetuses back there have gills and a tail for a time. Can't skip those steps. The youngsters have to go through the social animal stage in the same way, but just as a fetus can get through in 1 month the stage that evolution took 100 million years to get through, so our children can hurry through the social animal stage. Dr. 𝗏𝗲 was of the opinion that with the generations, we'd get through the stage faster and faster. Is that so? In 3,000 years, he estimated, at the present rate of progress, we'd have children who take to viewing at once. The boss had other notions, too. He was interested in improving robots to the point of making them capable of disciplining children without becoming mentally unstable. Why not? Discipline today, for a better life tomorrow, is a true expression of first law of robotics. Have such robots been developed yet? Clarissa shook her head. I'm afraid not. Dr. 𝗏𝗲 and Liebig had been working hard on some experimental models. Did Dr. 𝗏𝗲 have some of the models sent out to his estate? Was he a good enough roboticist to conduct tests himself? Oh, yes. He tested robots frequently. Do you know that he had a robot with him when he was murdered? I've been told so. Do you know what kind of model it was? You'll have to ask Liebig. As I told you, he's the roboticist who worked with 𝗏𝗲. You know nothing of it. Not a thing. If you think of anything, let me know. I will. And don't think new robot models are all that Dr. 𝗏𝗲 was interested in. Dr. 𝗏𝗲 used to say that time would come when unfertilized ova would be stored in banks at liquid air temperature and utilized for artificial insemination. In that way, eugenic principles could be truly applied, and we could get rid of the last vestiges of any need for seeing. I'm not sure that I quite go along with him so far, but he was a man of advanced notions. A very good Solarian. She added quickly, Do you want to go outside? The 5 through 8 group are encouraged to take part in outdoor play, and you could see them in action. Baley said cautiously, I'll try that. I may have to come back inside on rather short notice. Oh, yes, I forgot. Maybe you'd rather not go at all? No, Baley forced a smile. I'm trying to grow accustomed to the outdoors. Continuing. The wind was hard to bear. It made breathing difficult. It wasn't cold in a direct physical sense, but the feel of it, the feel of his clothes moving against his body, gave Baley a kind of chill. His teeth chattered when he tried to talk, and he had to force his words out in little bits. It hurt his eyes to look so far at the horizon, so hazy green and blue, and there was only limited relief when he looked at the pathway immediately before his toes. After all, he avoided looking up at the empty blue. Empty, that is, but for the piled-up white of occasional clouds and the glare of the naked sun. And yet, he could fight off the urge to run, to return to enclosure. He passed a tree, following Clarissa by some 10 paces, and he reached out a cautious hand to touch it. It was rough and hard to the touch. Frondly leaves moved and rustled overhead, but he did not raise his eyes to look at them. A living tree. Clarissa called out, "How do you feel?" "All right." "You can see a group of youngsters from here," she said. "They're involved in some kind of game. The robots organize the games and see to it the little animals don't kick each other's eyes out. With personal presence, you can just do that, you know." Baley raised his eyes slowly, running his glance along the cement of the pathway, out to the grass and down the slope, further and further out, very carefully, and to snap back to his toes if he grew frightened, feeling with his eyes. There were the small figures of boys and girls racing madly about, uncaring that they raced at the very outer rim of the world with nothing but air and space above them. The glitter of an occasional robot moved nimbly among them. The noise of the children was a far-off, incoherent squeaking in the air. "They love it," said Clarissa, "pushing and pulling and squabbling and falling down and getting up just to generally contacting skies above. How do children ever manage to grow up?" "What are those older children doing?" asked Baley. He pointed at a group of isolated youngsters standing to one side. "They're viewing. They're not in a state of personal presence. By viewing, they can walk together, talk together, race together, play together, anything except physical contact." "Where do children go when they leave here?" "To estates of their own. The number of deaths is, on the average, equal to the number of graduations." "To their parents' estates." "Skies above, no. It would be an amazing coincidence, wouldn't it, to have the parent die just as the child is of age?" "No. Child take any one that falls vacant." "The children take any one that falls vacant. I don't know that any of them would be particularly happy. Anyway, living in the mansion of one belonged to the parents, supposing, of course, they knew who their parents were." "Don't they?" She raised her eyebrows. "Why should they?" "Don't parents visit their children here?" "What a mind you have! Why should they want to?" Baley said. "Do you mind if I clear up a point for myself? Is it bad manners to ask a person if they had had children?" "It's an intimate question, wouldn't you say?" "In a way." "I'm hardened. Children are my business. Other people aren't." Baley said, "Have you any children?" Clarissa's Adam's apple made a soft but clearly visible motion in her throat as she swallowed. "I deserve that, I suppose, and you deserve an answer. I haven't." "Are you married?" "Yes, and I have an estate of my own, and would be there but for the emergency here. I'm just not confident of being able to control all those robots if I'm not here in person." She turned away unhappily, and then pointed. "Now, there's one of them gone tumbling, and of course he's crying." A robot was running with great space-devouring strides. Clarissa said, "He'll be picked up and cuddled, and if there's any real damage, I'll be called in." She added nervously, "I hope I don't have to be." Baley took a deep breath. He noted 3 trees, forming a small triangle 50 feet to his left. He walked in that direction, the grass soft and loathsome under his shoes, disgusting in its softness, like walking through corrupting flesh, and he nearly retched at the thought. He was among them, his back against one trunk. It was almost like being surrounded by imperfect walls. The sun was only a wavering series of glitters through the leaves, so disconnected as almost to be robbed of horror. Clarissa faced him from the path and slowly shortened the distance by half. "Mind if we stay here a while?" asked Baley. "Go ahead," said Clarissa. Baley said, "Once the youngsters graduate out of the farm, how do they get them to court one another?" "Court?" "Get to know one another," said Baley, vaguely wondering how the thought could be expressed safely. "So they can marry." "That's not their problem. They're matched by gene analysis, usually when they are quite young. That's the sensible way, isn't it?" "Are they always willing?" "To be married? They never are. It's a very traumatic process. At first they have to grow accustomed to one another, and a little bit of seeing each day, once the initial queasiness is gone, can do wonders." "What if they just don't like their partner?" "What? If the gene analysis indicates a partnership, what indifference does it?" "I understand," said Baley hastily. He thought of Earth and sighed. Clarissa said, "Is there anything else you would like to know?" Baley wondered if there were anything to be gained from a longer stay. He would not be sorry to be done with Clarissa and fetal engineering so that he might pass on to the next stage. He had opened his mouth to say as much, then Clarissa called out at some object far off. "You, child! You there! What are you doing?" Then over her shoulder, "Earthman! Baley, watch out! Watch out!" Baley scarcely heard her. He responded to the note of urgency in her voice. The nervous effort that held his emotions taut snapped wide, and he flamed into panic. All the terror of the open air and the endless vault of heaven broke in upon him. Baley gibbered. He heard himself mouthing meaningless sounds, and felt himself fall to his knees and slowly roll over onto his side as though he were watching the process from a distance. Also, from distance he heard the sighing hum piercing the air above him and ending with a sharp thwack. Baley closed his eyes, and his fingers clutched a thin tree root that skimmed the surface of the ground, and his nails burrowed into dirt. He opened his eyes. It must have been moments after. Clarissa was scolding sharply at the youngster, who remained at a distance. A robot, silent, stood closer to Clarissa. Baley had only time to notice the youngster held a strange object in his hand before his eyes sheared away. Breathing heavily, Baley struggled to his feet. He stared at the shaft of glistening metal that remained in the trunk of the tree against which he had been standing. He pulled at it, and it came out readily. It had not penetrated far. He looked at the point, but did not touch it. It was blunted, but it would have sufficed to tear his skin had he not dropped when he did. It took him 2 tries to get his legs moving. He took a step towards Clarissa and called, "You, youngster." Clarissa turned. Her face flushed. She said, "It was an accident. Are you hurt?" "No. What is this thing?" "It's an arrow. It is fired by a bow, which makes a taut string do the work." "Like this," it called the youngster impudently, and he shot another arrow into the air, then burst out laughing. He had light hair and a lithe body. Clarissa said, "You will be disciplined. Now leave." Wait, cried Baley. He rubbed his knees where a rock had caught and bruised him when he had fallen. "I have some questions. What's your name?" "Bick," he said carelessly. "Did you shoot that arrow at me, Bick?" That's right, said the boy. Do you realize you would have hit me if I hadn't been warned in time to duck? Bick shrugged. I was aiming to hit. Clarissa spoke hurriedly. You must let me explain. Archery is an encouraged sport. It is a competition without requiring contact. We have contests among the boys using viewing only. Now, I'm afraid some of the boys will aim at robots. It amuses them and it doesn't hurt the robots. I'm the only adult human on the estate, and when the boy saw you, he must have assumed you were a robot. Baley listened. His mind was clearing, and the natural dourness of his long face intensified. He said, Bick, did you think I was a robot? No, said the youngster. You're an Earthman. All right, go now. Bick turned and raced off, whistling. Baley turned to the robot. You! How did the youngster know I was an Earthman? Or weren't you with him when he shot? I was with him, Master. I told him you were an Earthman. Did you tell him what an Earthman was? Yes, Master. What is an Earthman? An inferior sort of human that ought not to be allowed on Solaria because he breeds disease, Master. And who told you that, boy? The robot maintained silence. Baley said, Do you know who told you? I do not, Master. It is in my memory store. So you told the boy I was a disease-breeding inferior, and he immediately shot at me. Why didn't you stop him? I would have, Master. I would have not allowed harm to come to a human, even an Earthman. He moved too quickly, and I was not fast enough. Perhaps you thought I was just an Earthman, not completely a human, and hesitated a bit. No, Master. It was said quite calm, but Baley's lips quirked grimly. The robot might deny in all faith, but Baley felt that that was exactly the factor involved. Baley said, What were you doing with the boy? I was carrying his arrows, Master. May I see them? He held out his hand. The robot approached and delivered a dozen of them. Baley put the original arrow, the one that had hit the tree, carefully at his feet, and looked the others over one by one. He handed them back and lifted the original arrow again. He said, Why did you give this particular arrow to the boy? No reason, Master. He had asked for an arrow some time earlier, and this was the one my hand touched first. He looked about for a target, then noticed you, and asked who the strange human was. I explained, I know what you explained. This arrow you handed him is the only one with gray veins at the rear. The others have black veins. The robot stared simply. Baley said, Did you guide the youngster here? We walked randomly, Master. The Earthman looked through the gap between the two trees through which the arrow had hurled itself towards the mark. He said, Would it happen by any chance that this youngster, Bick, was the best archer you have? The robot bent his head. He is the best, Master. Clarissa gasped. How did you ever come to guess that? It follows, said Baley dryly. Now please observe this gray-veined arrow and the others. The gray-veined arrow is the only one that seems oily at the point. I'll have melodrama, ma'am, by saying that your warning saved my life. This arrow that missed me is poisoned. Thus ends Chapter 12. Thank you, everybody. From the underground. Let's go make some cookies. See you later.